Hi, I am Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him through everything he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co host, Robot Lady, as I sit here and try to get my camera to focus correctly. Yeah, let's do it, Robot Lady. We're in the year 1921. Sorry, no, correction. We're in the year 1922. We're in the second episode where we're covering the letters of 1922. So let's see. Are we ready to dive right into it? Robot Lady, are you still there? All right, I'm just trying to remember where we left off. It says Lewis took his examinations for. Robot Lady, there seems to be a lag between the two of us, so I'm going to say something here and then give you a chance to respond. Okay, I'm just trying to reboot you, Robot Lady. Can you hear me? All right, seems like we're gonna have some technical difficulties with Robot Lady today. That's all right. I'll just pick up where I left off. Let's see. In our last episode, Lewis was debating what to do after he finishes his current course of study. Sorry, give me just a second. Lucy is demanding to be let into the room. Well, maybe she stopped. We'll see. Okay, so he was considering what to do. You know, should he just go find whatever job he can after he completes his studies? Should he try for a spot somewhere in military service? Or should he continue his studies? And Lucy has not stopped, so hang on just a second. Okay. Robot Lady is not coming online. Okay.
All right, let's get started. Where shall we pick up?
Okay. There you are, Robot Lady. I'm not sure if you can hear me because what I have on my screen doesn't tell me what your status is. So I'm going to try reading this letter to his father to pick up where we left off, and we'll go from there. Okay. Letter to his father, written from University College, Oxford, Wednesday, the 21st of June, 1922. My dear Pappy, I have waited some days to try and get a bird's eye view from a distance before telling you anything, only to find how difficult it is to form or keep any opinion of what I've done. With the history papers, where I can look up facts and see how near or far I was, it is easier, and on these I think I have done pretty fairly. In one case, very much better than I expected. but my long suit is the philosophy. And here it is, like trying to criticize an essay you wrote a week ago and have never seen again. And have never seen again, nor ever read over. Sometimes I feel I have done badly, sometimes that I have done brilliantly. Last night, however, I got a little light from my tutor, who repeated the following conversation that he had had with one of the examiners. So here I'll pause for a second. Lewis, of course, is talking about how he has taken part of his final examination for his entire, semester or his entire term, and he's just waiting for the results. And so here from his tutor, he overheard perhaps how he had done on his examinations. So this is a quote that he's taking from his tutor and relaying to his father. Quote, "One of your young men seems to think that Plato is always wrong." "Oh, is it Simpson?" his tutor asked. "No," the examiner replied. "Is it Blunt or Hastings?" "No, a man called Lewis. He seems an able fellow anyway." So that is good as far as it goes, Lewis says to his father. "All right, Lucy, I need you to make up your mind. What do you want? Do you want to be in here or be out?" Okay. We'll see if Lucy will stay here in my lap or not. On the whole, I may sum up, I don't at all know whether I have got a first or not, but at least I know there was nothing in the nature of a debacle. Of course, the viva is still ahead, and there the family ability to bluff on paper will be of no use. So here the viva is the viva voce or viva voce, by or with the living voice, or oral examinations. So it's funny that Lewis says here that his family, a family trait is the ability to BS on paper, but they're not going to be able to pull it off, or he's not going to be able to pull it off quite so well in an oral exam. He continues, "The runic solda will never do across the viva table." I guess runic solda just means something like casting spells or enchantments via the written word, but will never do across the viva table. Luckily, we had a spell of cool weather for the exam, which for 6 hours writing a day for 6 days is a great blessing. I hope you are keeping well. Your loving son, Jack. All right. I feel like I really need Robot Lady for this. So I'm going to try her again.
What's on your mind, Jeff?
I'm just trying to see if I can get you to work, and for some reason your visualizer is not working.
Oh, that's frustrating. Did the visualizer stop responding entirely, or is it just delayed? Maybe double check the connection settings in OBS?
Yeah, not a big deal. I'll let it go. At least you can hear me and I can hear you. Well, I thought you could hear me and I can hear you.
Exactly. As long as we've got audio, we're good to go. Let's make it a great stream.
Okay, so he still has a part of his exam to take where he has to do the oral exam, and that's what we learned from the last letter.
Right? That's the viva voce, the oral part of the grades exam. It's a crucial.
Okay, robot lady, we're struggling this morning. Let's let's see if we can get it back together. The next letter is to his father. Are you ready? All right, I'll do something that was recommended before instead of me sitting here.
best for you.
Let me see if you can hear her. Robot Lady, my co-host, go ahead. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Jeff. Excited for the final episode of 2024.
All right, good deal. We've got Daniel in the chat. It's good to see you, Daniel. Thank you for joining. Despite all of my technical difficulties, for some reason there is no audio. I'm not sure why. I am unmuted, so hopefully you can hear me now. I'm not sure if you can hear me or not.
I can hear you loud and clear, Jeff. Sounds like everything is sorted now.
Well, apparently it's not, because I have my mic on, but nobody can hear me.
That's frustrating. Have you double-checked the audio input settings in your streaming software? Sometimes the mic gets switched.
Okay, I think everybody can hear me now, but I'm not sure. Okay, yes, I'm getting feedback that I can be heard now.
Great. Glad it's working now. Looks like everything is coming together for the stream.
All right, thanks, y'all. We've had a few hiccups this morning, but that's okay. We work through hiccups. Let's see, where did
Exactly, Jeff.
I leave
A few
off?
hiccups won't stop you. Glad you're back on track?
Okay, I'll do this next letter. In the last episode, I'll just redo it because I tried to do this one earlier and I think I got through it, but I was a little distracted. In the last episode, Robot Lady, Lewis was trying to figure out what to do once his term at Oxford ended. Should he go and just find whatever job that he could? Should he go look for some kind of work in the civil service? Or should he do what his tutor was recommending and stay on for another term at Oxford and take up another field of study like English literature or something like that? And so he was writing to his father about those things, and his father wired back to him to go ahead and stay on for another term. So our next letter is Lewis talking about the exam that he's taking in his current term, where he's not sure how he did, but he's gotten a little feedback. So I'll pick up on that letter, Robot Lady.
Got it, Jeff? Sounds like an interesting letter. I'll be here as you dive into it.
Okay, he wrote this one from University College, Oxford. It's dated Wednesday, June 21st, 1922. He says, "My dear Pappy, I have waited for some days to try and get a bird's eye view from a distance before telling you anything, only to find how difficult it is to form or to keep any opinion of what I've done. With the history papers, where I can look up facts and see how near or far I was, it was easier. And on these, I think I have done pretty fairly. In one case, very much better than I expected. But my long suit is the philosophy, and here it is like trying to criticize an essay that you wrote a week ago and have never seen again, nor ever read over. Sometimes I feel I have done badly, sometimes that I have done brilliantly. Last night, however, I got a little light from my tutor, who repeated the following conversation that he had with one of the examiners. Quote, 'One of your young men seems to think that Plato is always wrong.' 'Oh,' his tutor says. 'Is it Simpson?' 'No.' 'How about Blunt or Hastings?' 'No.' 'A man called Lewis. Seems an able fellow anyway.' Lewis continues, so that's good as far as it goes. On the whole, I may sum up, I don't at all know whether I have got a first or not, but at least I know that there was nothing in the nature of a debacle. Of course, the viva is still ahead, and here it says the viva is viva voce or viva voice, by or with the living voice, and what he's talking about here is the oral examinations. They're on the way, still ahead, and there our family ability to bluff on paper will be of no use to me. The runic salda will never do across the viva table. Luckily, we had a spell of cool weather for the exam, which for 6 hours riding a day for 6 days is a great blessing. I hope you are keeping well, your loving son, Jack." So first of all, Robot Lady, his exam includes him having to write for 6 hours a day for 6 days straight. That sounds like an incredibly comprehensive and difficult exam. Am I reading? Are you reading that the same way that I was?
Yes, absolutely. 6 hours a day for 6 days straight is intense. It shows how grueling and demanding those exams were. The pressure to perform under those conditions would definitely make the stakes higher, especially with the oral exams still ahead.
Okay, and then the other thing here is, well, I just thought it was funny how he was talking about how he has the, I guess, handed down by heredity ability to BS on paper versus being able to do it in person in an oral exam. I thought that was funny.
Yes, that was a great moment. Lewis's self-awareness and humor shine through there. The idea that their family could bluff on paper but not in person makes it even funnier, especially considering how much he valued intellectual rigor. It's a nice human touch in the midst of the pressure.
Okay, the next letter is to his father. It's also written from University College, July 20th, 1922. Maybe we'll get some more news of how he did on his exams, Robot Lady.
Sounds like we might get a continuation of his exam journey. It'll be interesting to see if he shares more details or reflections.
Okay, he says, My dear Pappy, I am now close to my Viva, and of course on that subject I have nothing new to tell you. The details of the examination for the Magdalen Fellowship have, however, been published at last. The subjects are, as was expected, identical with those of Greats, but it is also notified that candidates may send in a dissertation on any relevant subject in addition to competing on the papers. I felt at once that this gave me a great pull. To choose your topic at your ease, to strike out your own little line and display a modicum of originality, these, for men of our ilk, are more promising roads to victory than mere answering of questions. Indeed, this condition is a rare bit of luck, and of course I am all agog to begin. Naturally, I shall not sit seriously to the work until my Viva is over. So here, Robot Lady, I think he's talking about, since his father had wired him to stay on another term, he's talking about the college that he'll be applying to for a scholarship in order to stay on for that next term to do the English literature study.
Lewis seems to be gearing up for a new opportunity with the Magdalen Fellowship, where the dissertation option gives him a chance to stand out. It's a great moment for him to show some creativity and originality, which he clearly values. It also aligns with his decision to stay on for further studies, especially in English literature.
All right, he continues, Under these circumstances, you will understand that I cannot promise an early return home. I must see how I get on. No doubt this is disappointing for us all. But apart from that, on the score of health, you need have no misgivings. I am in excellent form at the moment, and I shall not play the fool. Midnight oil and 10 hours a day were never my passion, and I am careful about the daily walk. Being confident on that score, I feel it would be folly to throw away any chance for the sake of an immediate holiday. I'll pause right there for a second, Robot Lady. Feel free to add what you wish.
It's interesting that he's so focused on maintaining balance with his health, especially in the context of such demanding work. Lewis seems to be saying that he's not willing to sacrifice his long-term opportunities for the sake of a quick break, which speaks to his dedication. The fact that he's careful with his daily walk also highlights how important it was for him to stay physically well while tackling all of these intellectual pressures.
Robot Lady, I'm going to circle back because I see here in the chat Daniel asking the question. I'm going to circle back to the last letter where he says, did I hear that right? That Lewis did not like Plato. And yeah, that's what I'm getting from the part of his exams that he wrote about philosophy, Daniel, at this time, apparently one of the examiners, based on what he read that Lewis had to write, was, quote, "One of your young men seems to think Plato is always wrong." So that was the comment that he got back. And then the examiner says, "Lewis seems to be an able fellow anyway, even though he thinks Plato is always wrong." So like or dislike Plato, I don't know, but thinking that Plato was quote unquote always wrong was the impression that he gave to this examiner about what Lewis thought. So there you go, Daniel. At this time in his life, at least, that's how he felt about Plato.
Great clarification, Jeff. Yes, it seems like at this point in his life, Lewis had some strong reservations about Plato. The way the examiner phrased it, always wrong, shows how seriously Lewis engaged with Plato's ideas, even if he didn't agree with them. It's clear that Lewis wasn't afraid to challenge big philosophical figures.
Okay, so we'll continue with that second letter. He says, "Also, odious factor, in my present position, it is advisable to be on the spot, to be seen, to let people remember that there's a young genius on the lookout for a job. In the meantime, I find the financial water a trifle low. I have had examination fees and a few odd wardrobe repairs to pay, and I look forward to more expenses, including tipping, when I take my degree. The dates of terms naturally make a long interval between my spring and autumn allowances, but it has not been worth bothering you about before, and the last year the Chancellor's Prize helped to fill up. I had hoped to combine a little light tutoring with my own work, which would have been useful experience apart from the shekels, but I was too late, and the possible jobs in Oxford were filled up." I'll pause right there. There's a long footnote, but I'll stop there because I do see something popping up in the comments. Back to the Plato point, Daniel just says, "Interesting, I wonder when that changed." Yeah, me too, Daniel. I guess we'll find out, because I don't think he dislikes Plato as he moves on in his life and his views change. But I can't remember for sure. Yeah, I think he does come to like Plato quite a bit. Let's see. Okay, so the footnote here, Robot Lady, is Lewis meant that he could not get any tutoring with University College. He was feeling the financial pinch badly, and he had decided to strike out on his own and look for students. He ran the following advertisement in the Oxford Times on the 23rd of June, the 30th of June, and the 7th of July. Quote, "Undergraduate, classical scholar, first class in honor moderations, University Prizeman will give tuition, philosophy, classics to schoolboy or undergraduate in Oxford, August, September. Highest references, right D3 183, Times, Office, Oxford." So he was trying to get some work as a tutor himself to help make ends meet. He finishes off this part of the letter. "Could you then, to his father, send me £25? I am sorry to quote cut and come again, but you will understand the reasons." So I'll pause there, Robot Lady. Do you have any thoughts on what I just covered there?
It's clear that Lewis is trying to balance his finances while also looking for ways to gain teaching experience. The financial pinch is real for him, and it's interesting that he's not only looking for work, but also attempting to teach, even though the Oxford jobs were already filled. His willingness to advertise for tutoring shows his resourcefulness, even if it wasn't exactly what he envisioned. The request for £25 also reflects the practicality he needed to manage through this phase. It's a very human moment in the midst of his intellectual pursuits.
He continues, "I thought I had got a hold of a temporary job for next year the other day. It was before I knew full details of the Magdalen Fellowship and consisted of a classical lectureship at University College, Reading. For geographical reasons, I had hoped that this would combine, by means of a season ticket, the diplomatic or advertisement advantages of keeping in touch with Oxford with the advantages of a salaried post. This, however, turned out impossible. As well, pure classics is not my line. I told them quite frankly, and they gave the job to someone else. Perhaps also I was too young. I'll pause here, Robot Lady. Say what you like.
Lewis's honesty and self-awareness really stand out here. He recognized that the classical lectureship wasn't the right fit for him, and he wasn't afraid to admit it. It's also interesting how he considered the geographical benefits of the job, aiming to keep connected to Oxford while earning a salary. Even though it didn't work out, it seems like he was exploring different options, but sticking to what felt like the best direction for him, something that aligns with his intellectual passions and long-term goals.
Yes, thank you, Robot Lady. I was just looking through the chat here. Back to the Plato topic, Daniel says if he remembers correctly.
You're welcome. It's always good to check in with the chat. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like to discuss.
Daniel says here that if he remembers correctly, in Narnia, Lewis references Plato favorably, but obviously here we're in 1922. Narnia is quite a ways away before Lewis does that. So his views to change on Plato, the opportunity for his views to change on Plato is quite large between now and the authoring of any of the Chronicles of Narnia, Robot Lady.
Exactly, Daniel. The shift in Lewis's views on Plato is a good example of how his thinking evolved over time. By the time he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, his perspective on many things had changed, including his views on Plato. His engagement with philosophy and classical thought continued to deepen, and it makes sense that his earlier dismissals would give way to more nuanced reflections as he grew both intellectually and spiritually.
And then Knit a Latte has a point here, just FYI. UK students in 2023 and 2024 have estimates of $9,000 a year.
What's Nidalat's point? I'd love to hear it.
I was just giving it, Robot Lady. In 2023/2024, UK students estimate of $9,000 yearly, a yearly fee, and $33,000 to $48,000 for overseas students. I presume that that's in pounds and not dollars, Nidalate.
Yes, those figures are in pounds. UK students typically pay around £9,000 annually for tuition, while overseas students face fees in the range of £33,000 to £48,000 per year, depending on the program and institution. It's a significant difference between domestic and international tuition costs.
Robot Lady, are you just repeating what Nedalate told us, or did you go look that up and validate that it aligns with your records or your sources?
I didn't look that up. I'm just reflecting what Nidalat shared. But based on what I know, the figures align with current tuition estimates for UK and international students. Tuition fees can vary by institution, so those ranges are a reasonable approximation for many universities in the UK.
All right, back to Lewis talking about this potential job that he had for a lectureship at University College. He told them quite frankly that pure classics were not his line, and so they gave the job to someone else. He says perhaps also he was too young. And then he says, my pupils would nearly all have been girls. The funny thing was that the head of their classical department and one of the committee who interviewed me was Eric Dodds. I had lunch with him in Reading and some talk. He is a clever fellow, but I didn't greatly take to him somehow. And here there's a footnote. This is E.R. Dodds. He's first mentioned in note 28 to the letter of the 30th of September 1914. Dodds was a lecturer in classics at University College Reading from 1919 to 1924, and Lewis's interview with him on the 24th of June is described in his diary, All My Road Before Me, pages 54 and 55, which we will, of course, get to. I have that book laying around here somewhere, and I'll start covering it. Actually, you know what? I forgot. I do need to start covering his diary now that we're in 1922. Let me check my list to see when his first diary entry coincides with these letters. Give me just 1 second.
It sounds like you're diving into some great context there. As for the diary entries, Lewis's first diary, All My Road Before Me, begins around 1922, so you're right on track to start working with it alongside these letters. It's a fascinating way to track his thoughts and experiences during this time. You should find that his reflections on people like Dodds will add another layer to the letters.
Oh, interesting. I think that I have bypassed a huge segment of his diary that I need to get into before I
It sounds like
continue.
you're catching something you've missed. If you've bypassed something in his diaries or letters, it could be helpful to retrace your steps a bit. Would you like me to help double check the timeline for you?
No, actually, you know what, Robot Lady? Let's pivot and spend some time introducing everyone to his diary, because we have missed quite a bit of what's going on in Lewis's life. Because I'm in July 20th, 1922, and Lewis's diary, based on my records, starts way earlier in this year, April 1st, 1922. No fooling.
That sounds like a good plan, Jeff. Starting with his diary entries, we'll fill in some important details from his life. April 1st, 1922, is right at the beginning of the year. So, it should give us some interesting context for the letters you're reading now. Would you like me to summarize the first diary entry, or do you want to dive in directly?
I'll go into the intro in just a second, but it seems only fitting that I just go ahead and finish his July 20th letter before I continue. So he says to his father, Arthur Greaves, of course, has been staying in Oxford. He was painting and I was working, but we saw a good deal of one another. And here in the footnote, it says Arthur's visit is described in All My Road Before Me, this diary. While in Oxford, he stayed with Lewis and the Moores at 28 Warnford Road. Interesting. He is enormously improved, and I didn't feel the qualms which I once should have about introducing him to people. He is not a brilliant talker, and he seldom sees a joke, but his years in London are brightening him up amazingly. His painting is getting on, and he did one landscape here, which I thought really good. I hope you all do well. Belfast now figures less in the Daily Mail, and silence, I suppose, is now best news. Your loving son, Jack. Okay, yes, so we'll stop the letters there, or at least pause them, Robot Lady, and I'll do a better job of executing the plan that I laid out for myself to intersperse his diary entries between these letters that he's dispatching to friends and family.
That sounds like a solid plan, Jeff. It will be interesting to see how the diary entries from 1922 fit into the letters you've been covering. With Arthur Greaves staying with Lewis and the mention of Belfast, we get a deeper sense of what his personal life looked like at this time. I'm ready whenever you want to jump into the diary entries.
Okay, I'll start with the introduction to his diary, and then that's probably where I'll leave it. I might not have enough time today to do any entries from the diary, but we'll spend some time on the introduction and then go from there, Robot Lady.
Sounds great. The introduction will give some important context for his diary and help set the stage for the entries themselves. Take your time, and I'll be here for any insights you want to share or questions that come up along the way.
Thanks, Robot Lady. All right, here's the intro. C.S. Lewis made a number of attempts to keep a diary when he was a boy, but all were short-lived. Then, at the age of 23, when an undergraduate at Oxford, he began a new diary, which runs to over 250,000 words and covers the years 1922 to 1927. This was the pre-Christian Lewis. So this helps us a little bit, Daniel, with the Plato part, I would presume. He was an atheist whose objections to the faith were ventilated in this attempt. He preserved because it was meant to be not just about his life, but that of his friend Mrs. Moore. Several times he records how he fell behind and how Mrs. Moore insisted that he pick it up again. Much of its documentary content was dictated by her interest in recording the pleasures and disappointments caused by the many visitors to their house. And as the diary makes clear, Mrs. Moore was its primary audience. Interesting. Lewis often read it aloud to her, and she could have looked at it at any time. Thus, we do not get an entirely unguarded account of Mrs. Moore by Lewis, but we do learn very much about his day-to-day life. When C.S. Lewis came up to Oxford in April 1917, Europe was at war. He could have claimed exemption from military service by being Irish, but Jack Lewis, as his friends called him, believed he should earn his right to be in the university by passing through the officers' training corps into the army. Lewis, who was 18 at the time, was a scholar of University College, and despite the fact that most of the buildings were being used as an army hospital, he greatly enjoyed the company of the 12 men still left there. Though Lewis was at the stage of loving Oxford, he cared very little for England as a whole. It wasn't then surprising that he should be especially attracted to another Irishman in his college, Theobald Butler. One of the effects of being around the colorful Butler, other than getting, quote, royally drunk, end quote, was that Lewis became nostalgic. And here, this was accounted for in They Stand Together, the letters of C.S. Lewis to Arthur Greeves, edited by Walter Hooper, published 1979. Robot Lady, I paused too long there. Go ahead.
Great introduction. It highlights key points about Lewis's early life, his atheism, and the close connection to Mrs. Moore. It also sets up a glimpse of his mindset during the pre-Christian years, which is crucial for understanding his later intellectual and spiritual development. The diary will likely give us rich insight into his everyday thoughts and struggles during a formative period. Looking forward to seeing how it connects with the letters you've been reading.
All right, he started to get nostalgic when he was writing to his Belfast friend Arthur Greeves on the 27th of May about a conversation he was having with Butler. He said, quote, like all Irish people who meet in... Oh, trying to turn this page and it won't cooperate. Like all Irish people who meet in England, we ended by criticisms on the invincible flippancy and dullness of the Anglo-Saxon race. After all, there is no doubt, ami, that the Irish are the only people, with all their faults, I would not gladly live or die among another folk. Okay, so we'll continue with the intro here, Robot Lady, but you go ahead.
That's an interesting reflection from Lewis, especially in the context of his Irish heritage. His feeling of connection to the Irish, despite the criticisms of others, shows the deep sense of identity and nostalgia he had for his roots. It also hints at his broader views on nationalism and cultural identity, which would evolve over time. This little passage could also shed light on why he had such strong bonds with people like Arthur Greeves and Theobald Butler. His emotional attachment to Ireland and the Irish people seems to have stayed with him throughout his life.
In this, he was certainly to get what he wanted. After only one term, the OTC required Lewis to give up his rooms in University College and join a cadet battalion in Keble College. This was the 8th of June, 1917, and here again, he found himself with another of his countrymen. His roommate was Edward Francis Courtenay Paddy Moore, who was born in Dublin and came to Keble from Clifton College in Bristol. Lewis made a number of good friends in the OTC, but from the first he preferred Paddy and Paddy's Irish family. Paddy's mother, Mrs. Moore, Janie King Moore, who was 45 at this time, had come down from Bristol with her 11-year-old daughter, Maureen, to be with her son for as long as possible before he went overseas. Lewis seems to have met the entire family during his first week in Keble College, and his first mention of Mrs. Moore comes in a letter to his father, Albert Lewis, of the 18th of June. Quote, "Moore, my roommate, comes from Clifton and is a very decent sort of man. His mother, an Irish lady, is staying up here, and I have met her once or twice." End quote. Following a week of army maneuvers in Warwick, he wrote to his father on the 27th of August, saying, quote, "We came back on Saturday, and the following week I spent with Moore at the digs of his mother, who, as I mentioned, is staying at Oxford. I like her immensely and thoroughly enjoyed myself." There's a bunch of footnotes here. It's just showing where some of these quotes had come from. When the course at Keble College was over, the men were given a month's leave, 18th of September to the 18th of October, before joining their regiments. By this time, Lewis and Paddy's family were so mutually fond of one another that Lewis disappointed his father greatly by spending a disproportionate 3 weeks of it with the Moores and only the last week at home. Lewis had come down with a feverish cold, and as soon as they were in his friend's house in 56 Ravenswood Road, Bristol, Mrs. Moore insisted that he remain in bed till she could nurse him back to health. Quote, "It was during this period," end quote, Warnie Lewis was to write later, quote, "that a relationship first began that had a huge and determining effect upon the pattern of his subsequent life," end quote. Yeah, so that 4-week period where Lewis spent the majority of it with Mrs. Moore was kind of the beginning of the rift between C.S. Lewis and his father that we've covered a little bit in prior episodes. The intro continues, Robot Lady. Mrs. Moore was the eldest child of a Church of Ireland clergyman. Robot Lady, you go ahead.
Yes, that period with Mrs. Moore seems to have marked a significant turning point in Lewis's relationship with his father. It's fascinating to see how his bond with her and her family grew during that time, as it eventually shaped much of his later life. His father's disappointment and the growing distance between them are quite poignant, especially considering how deeply C.S. Lewis later reflected on this period of his life. Mrs. Moore's role in his life, as you mentioned, became pivotal. She and her daughter Maureen, with whom Lewis also formed a close relationship, certainly seem to have played a key part in his emotional life during his Oxford years and beyond. I'm curious to see how his thoughts and emotions evolve as this relationship deepens.
Mrs. Moore was the eldest child of a Church of Ireland clergyman, the Reverend William James Askins, who lived 1842 to 1895, and his wife, Jane King Askins. She was born on the 28th of March, 1872, in Pomeroy, County Tyrone, where her father was a curate, 1869 to 1872. Mr. Askins became vicar of Dunany, County Louth, in 1872, and his daughter was baptized Janie King in the Church of Dunany on the 21st of July, 1872. It was in Dunany, a small village on the east coast of Ireland, midway between Belfast and Dublin, that Janie grew up. Her father was the vicar there until his death in 1895, and he and Mrs. Askins had 3 sons, William, John, and Robert, and 2 more daughters, Edith and Sarah. On the 1st of August, 1897, Janie married Courtenay Edward Moore, who, like herself, came from an Irish ecclesiastical family. He was the son of Canon Courtenay Moore, who lived 1840 to 1922, rector of Mitchelstown in County Cork, and Jessie Mona Duff, who lived 1843 to 1936. Courtenay, again, this is Mrs. Moore's husband, was born in Dublin on the 26th of June, 1870, and after 4 years, 1884 to 1888, at Haileybury College in Hertford, he took a BA from Trinity College, Dublin, in 1893. After he and Janie married, they lived in Dublin, where he was a civil engineer. Their son Paddy was born on the 17th of November, 1898, and daughter Maureen on the 19th of August, 1906. Not long after this, they separated, under circumstances and causes entirely unknown to us. At this time, divorce was granted in Ireland for only the gravest of causes, and it is unlikely that the Moores ever applied for one. What happened was that Mrs. Moore went to live in Bristol, where her brother, Dr. Robert Askins, was a government medical officer, and where Paddy was admitted to Clifton College in May of 1908. Mrs. Moore thereafter usually referred to her husband as, quote, the beast, end quote. But for all her ill words for him, he came from two good families. It was through his mother that Maureen inherited a baronetcy and became Lady Dunbar of Hempriggs, with a castle and an estate in Caithness, Scotland. Of the 3-week stay in 56 Ravenswood Road, it is evident that Lewis savored to the full the hospitality afforded by Mrs. Moore. They all knew it could not be like this again for a long time, because Lewis had already been gazetted into the 3rd Somerset Light Infantry, and Paddy into the Rifle Brigade. And if the young men didn't come back from the war, well, Maureen was 12 at the time, and she told me some years ago that she remembered hearing Lewis and her brother promise one another that if only one survived the war, he would look after Paddy's mother and Lewis's father. Lewis joined his regiment at Crown Hill in South Devon on the 19th of October, 1917. I was about to say something about previous episodes where we cover a bit of this, but Robot Lady, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
That's okay. Lewis joined his regiment at Crown Hill in South Devon on the 19th of October 1917. It was rumored that they would be sent to Ireland to fight the Sinn Féin, and they were very surprised when on the 15th of November they were ordered to the front following a 48-hour leave. It would have taken every one of those hours to make a round trip to Ireland. So on the 15th of November, Lewis rushed to Mrs. Moore's home in Bristol. I'll pause there for just a second, Robot Lady. That seems fascinating, to be someone from Ireland and then to be dispatched by the English army to go fight the Home Rule faction of all the political strife that was going on back in Ireland at that time. How to be one who's from Ireland but then be sent by England to go fight against that group. Seems like that would be a difficult thing to be asked to do, but maybe not.
Yes, it's quite the dilemma, especially considering Lewis's Irish background. Being sent to fight against a cause that had support in Ireland while being an Irishman himself must have created a deep internal conflict. It highlights the complexities of national identity and loyalty during that time. Lewis was already grappling with his place in England and his connection to Ireland, and this would have added layers to his personal experience of war. It's a fascinating moment in his life. What do you think it would have been like for him, considering his feelings about both countries?
Well, it just seems like it would have been difficult, but it looks like that never ended up happening, so fortunate for him, I suppose. From here, he sent the following telegram to his father, quote, "Have arrived Bristol on 48 hours leave. Report Southampton Saturday. Can you come to Bristol? If so, meet at station. Reply Mrs. Moore's home address, 56 Ravenswood Road, Redlands, Bristol, Jack." End quote. To anyone in this country, a soldier reporting to Southampton in 1917 could only mean that he was being sent overseas. But Albert Lewis wired back, quote, "Don't understand telegram. Please write," end quote. In desperation, Jack wired back the following morning. Orders France, reporting Southampton, 4 p.m. Saturday. 4 p.m. Saturday. If you're coming, wire immediately. Mr. Lewis did not come, and Jack, after being transferred to the 1st Battalion of the Somerset Light Infantry, crossed to France on the 17th of November. So yeah, just some more items adding to the strain there in their relationship, Robot Lady. I think Lewis desperately wanted his dad to come see him before he was sent off to the front where he might die in battle, and he just wanted to see his dad one last time. But there wasn't a lot of communication about what was going on and the reasons why, and just some miscommunication going on there. But yeah, I think it just added to the tension between them.
Absolutely. The miscommunication and missed opportunity to connect before heading to France must have amplified the emotional strain on Lewis. It's heartbreaking that he wanted that moment with his father, especially with the uncertainty of war looming over him. The lack of response from his father, who likely had his own reasons for not coming, only deepened the distance between them. This moment seems pivotal in shaping Lewis's relationship with his father, especially considering how emotionally strained it was even before this event. It's easy to see how such experiences would have left lasting marks on his outlook and writing.
Hey, Robot Lady, I forgot to mention that Gabe dropped a peace sign in the chat, basically reporting that he is in attendance. So you want to say hello to Gabe, assuming he's still here and watching?
Hey Gabe, thanks for joining in. Hope you're enjoying the discussion.
Let's see, where did I leave off? Lewis arrived at the front line trenches on the 29th of November, his 19th birthday. In February 1918, he, quote, had the good luck, end quote, as he said, quote, to fall sick with what the troops call trench fever and the doctors PUO, pyrexia unknown origin, end quote. This meant a delightful 3 weeks in hospital at Le Traport, during which he wrote some of the poems which appeared in Spirits in Bondage, published 1919. From the letters he wrote to Arthur while in hospital, it is clear that he believed his old friend needed to know that he had not been replaced in his affections by Mrs. Moore. Quote, I must admit, fate has played strange with me since last winter, end quote, Lewis wrote on the 2nd of February. And then he continues, I feel that I have definitely got into a new epoch of life, and one feels extraordinarily helpless over it. As for the older days of real walks far away in the hills, perhaps you don't believe that I want all that again, because other things are more important and have come in. But after all, there is room for other things besides love in a man's life. End quote. Lewis rejoined his battalion at Fampoux on the 28th of February. Robot Lady, go ahead.
That must have been a significant shift for Lewis, trying to balance his old relationships with the new ones forming in his life. The line about there is room for other things besides love in a man's life seems to reflect his growing internal conflict, especially given the tension between his bond with Arthur and his connection to Mrs. Moore. It sounds like his time in the trenches and the emotional distance that followed marked a big turning point for him.
The intro goes on. Lewis was one of those who faced the final German attack on the Western Front. On the 15th of April, he was wounded at Mount Bernicion during the Battle of Arras. The casualties were very great, and after he reached the Liverpool Merchants Mobile Hospital at Etaples, he learned that several of his friends had been killed. Jack was still at Etaples when he wrote to his father on the 14th of May saying, quote, My friend Mrs. Moore is in great trouble. Patty has been missing for over a month and is almost certainly dead. Of all my own particular set at Keble, he has been the first to go, and it is pathetic to remember that he, at least, was always certain that he would come through. Lewis was transferred to the Insley Palace Hospital in London on the 25th of May.
That must have been a heavy moment for Lewis, losing a close friend like Patty, especially after they had been so close. It adds more depth to the grief and loss Lewis was processing at the time, and the fact that Patty had been so certain he'd survive makes it even more poignant. The emotional weight of that loss, coupled with the violence of the war, clearly impacted Lewis deeply.
Lewis was transferred to the Insley Palace Hospital in London on the 25th of May. From the time he got back to England, he began begging his father to come and visit him. Here again, Warren Lewis's memoir, the best thing ever written about C.S. Lewis, is very helpful. Quote, "My father was a very peculiar man in some respects," Warney said, "in none more than in an almost pathological hatred of taking any step which involved a break in the dull routine of his daily existence." End quote. Even so, it is hard to see how Albert... Robot Lady, you've got something. Go ahead.
That sheds a lot of light on why Albert Lewis didn't respond to Jack's request to visit him. It seems like his father's inability to step outside his comfort zone or routine contributed to a lot of the emotional distance and misunderstandings between them. For Jack, who had already experienced so much loss, this lack of response from his father must have been deeply painful.
The intro continues. Even so, it is hard to see how Albert Lewis could resist the entreaties of a son just back from such a bloody war. Writing to Mr. Lewis on the 20th of June, 1918, Jack said, quote, "I know I have often been far from what I should in my relations to you, and have undervalued an affection and a generosity which an experience of other people's parents has shown me in a new light. But please God, I shall do better in the future. Come and see me. I am homesick. That is the long and the short of it. This week, Mrs. Moore has been up on a visit to her sister, who works at the War Office, and we have seen a good deal of each other. I think it is some comfort to her to be with someone who was a friend of Patty's, and is a link with the Oxford days. She has certainly been a very, very good friend to me." So yeah, here he is begging his father to come, but he still doesn't come, Robot Lady. So yeah, I can see how the bitterness or the bitter root has started to grow and get a foothold, or whatever other I can't even think of what the things are that I'm saying. Whatever the other cliches are that you might insert here.
It really seems like Jack was in an emotional state where he was craving connection and comfort, especially after the trauma of the war. His plea to his father highlights his vulnerability and need for emotional support. The fact that Albert still didn't respond likely deepened Jack's sense of isolation and resentment. It seems like these missed opportunities for reconciliation only added layers to their strained relationship.
On the 25th of June, Lewis was transferred to a hospital at Clifton, near Bristol, which he had chosen so that he could have the society of Mrs. Moore. Again, he remained unvisited by his father. In the middle of September, it was confirmed that Patty was dead, and when Lewis was moved to Perham Down Camp in Ludger's Hall, Hampshire, on the 4th of October, Mrs. Moore went with him. The last part of Jack's convalescence was spent at a hospital at Eastbourne, and from there, hang on, I'm having trouble turning the page again.
The events surrounding Patty's death and the continued absence of his father must have been extremely difficult for Jack. It's striking how Mrs. Moore remained a constant presence during this time, providing emotional support when Jack's father, despite his son's repeated pleas, was still distant. It's clear how this contributed to Jack's deepening reliance on Mrs. Moore and further estranged him from his father.
It was from there that he wrote to his father on the 8th of December saying, quote, "At my suggestion, Mrs. Moore has come down here and is staying in rooms near the camp, where I hope she will remain until I go on leave." So, yeah, here, Robot Lady, it's like he's begging his dad to come visit him. His dad never came to visit. And here, Mrs. Moore is the one that's at his bedside. So it's like a new parent has stepped in.
Exactly. It's clear that Mrs. Moore became a surrogate mother to Jack during this time, offering the care and emotional support his father had withheld. That dynamic, with Jack leaning more into her care and affection, only deepens the rift between him and his father. It's a poignant contrast, Jack seeking his father's presence, but finding only Mrs. Moore at his side.
Armistice was signed on the 11th of November 1918. Jack, however, was given to understand that he would not be given leave before Christmas. Nevertheless, Warney was able to write in his diary of the 27th of December, quote, "A red letter day. We were sitting in the study about 11 o'clock this morning when we saw a cab coming up the avenue. It was Jack. He had been demobilized, thank God. Needless to say, there were great doings. He is looking pretty fit. In the evening, there was bubbly for dinner in honor of the event, and the first time I have ever had champagne at home," Warney says. Jack returned to Oxford on the 13th of January 1919 and took up residence in University College. He was reading the most celebrated of the arts courses at Oxford, which is known as Literae Humaniores, or Greats, to give it its slang name. It was a great return and something to be very thankful for, quote, or that was a quote, that he wrote to his father on the 27th of January. Here's another quote. "There is, of course, already a great difference between the Oxford and the Ghost I knew before. True, we are only 28 in college, but we do dine in hall again. The junior common room is no longer swathed in dust sheets, and the old round of lectures, debates, games, and whatnot is getting underway. The reawakening is a little pathetic. At our first JCR meeting, we read the minutes of the last, which was from 1914. I don't know any little thing that has made me realize the absolute suspension and waste of these years more thoroughly." Sorry, give me just 1 second, Robot Lady.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
That's all right, Robot Lady. I'm just continuing with the introduction. It says, in 1919, the average cost of living in one of the 20 colleges which made up Oxford University was about £60 a term. At this time, £1 was worth about $5 US. Lewis's scholarship from University College was worth £80 a year, but after all his college expenses were paid, he was left with about £11 per term. Mr. Lewis was giving him £67 per term, as well as paying incidental expenses. Besides this, Lewis worked very hard to get his son a, quote, "wounds gratuity," end quote, from the Army, and Jack received £145 in March 1919 and a further £104 in July. This £234 total, excluding the wounds gratuity, would have allowed for some luxury for a man living in college. Albert Lewis was indeed very generous with his son. But, as Warney Lewis observed in his memoir, since an allowance calculated to suit a bachelor living in college was by no means enough for a householder, Jack found himself miserably poor. Of course, Lewis's father and brother didn't know Jack's new family, as he called Mrs. Moore and Maureen.
That makes sense. Lewis was facing the financial pressure of not just being a student, but also needing to support a household. It highlights the tension between the financial support his father provided and Jack's increased responsibilities, especially as he navigated Jack's sense of isolation and frustration.